Hello and welcome to the video lecture on Intro to Arrays. This is the second lesson of Unit 6, and today we're going to get into a new data structure that we're going to call an array. An array is a data value. It's able to hold multiple data values in one convenient location. So just a few significant points here about an array. It is a single entity that can store multiple objects. The individual values we'll call elements, right? So this array, you can consider it kind of like a box that holds multiple pieces of data. And each of those pieces of data is called an element. Each array has an index, a corresponding index, and that's kind of its ordered positioning, a locator, if you will. So the first element has an index of 0. The second one would have 1, 2, 3, 4, keeps going up like that. The nice thing about arrays, because they are ordered from 0 to some number, is that for loops can be used to access all the various elements of the array. And that's kind of what makes arrays very, very useful. Because if we have a whole lot of values and that we want to kind of cycle through, or even objects that we want to kind of run the same sort of code onto, instead of individually calling those individual variables, we can put them into an array, and then we can loop through that array with a for loop, and then the same code can be run on each of those individual elements without having to rewrite all of that code over and over again. It's the looping, it's the sequencing that makes it very convenient and can significantly cut down on the amount of code. So let's declare an array. All right, so declarations for here, I am declaring a single variable of the int data type called score. If I want to declare an array of ints, then I would create int bracket, close bracket, scores. And that would create or declare an integer array. So it doesn't have a size yet, but this would create the ability to store multiple integers in one location, and that identifier would be scores. We would use the indexes to access the individual locations. Now, this declaration does not create an array. It only kind of declares that I'm going to create an array. But at this point, it's still null. It's not holding an array. So if we want to create an array, we actually have a couple different ways. I'll let you kind of read through this if you like. They are available on the notes that are on Schoology. But what this is talking about is that declaring the array doesn't create the array. You must initialize the array as well. And there's a couple different ways that we can initialize, which is where the creation actually happens. One way is to use the new keyword. So here you see int array high scores equals new int 5. And what this does is it says I'm going to create an array of integers. I'm going to call it high scores, and I'm going to assign it to be a new integer array. This number 5 here indicates the size of the array. And so what these examples here, they show us a number of things. The first thing I want to point out here is that the int array, the double array, the Boolean array, the string array, you see I'm declaring what type of value is going to be stored inside of my array. In Java, you must declare what type of values will be stored in the array. Some languages like JavaScript can allow you to mix and match values of different types. But because Java is typed language, your array can only hold one type of data. So integers, doubles, Boolean, strings. So that's the first thing I want to point out here, is that you have to declare what type of array, what type of values will be held in that array. The second thing I want to kind of point out here is notice that the identifiers that I chose all end with an S, right? They're all plural identifiers. And that's just a convention. That doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to do it that way. But it is how many people create arrays and how they name arrays. Because they hold multiple pieces of information, you name them with a plural identifier, and that helps to kind of distinguish between variables that are singular and variables that are plural. But again, it's not anything hard and fast that you must do. The third thing I want to show you here is the number that goes into these arrays at the end indicates how many locations, how many spaces are going to be available in the array. As you can see, you can give it different values. You can create an array of different length. How big the array is depends on how big you want it to be. But with an array in Java, it has a fixed length. Once you've declared it and initialized it to be 5 or 8 or 3, that's it. That's the size of that array. Stats cannot be any bigger or smaller than 3. I can't add more space to it, and I can't take away space. Some languages allow you to modify that length, to add more or to take some away. But in Java, an array is a fixed size that gets established when you initialize it. Java also has another data structure called array lists. An array list is malleable. You can add and subtract to its length. You can put new values into it. You can take and make it smaller from it as well. But that is an array list, not an array. We're not going to talk too much about array lists in this class. You will learn about that in AP next year, but we're not getting into array lists here in the Intro to Computer Science class. So I created those arrays, high scores, vals, nums, right? When I initialize it to a certain size, you notice the primitives get initialized to default values, right? If I have an array of integers, they're all going to be 0 unless I give it a different value later. Your doubles are 0.0. Your false for all your Booleans. Now, your strings are null, meaning any type of object, and this is true for any object array that you create, your initializer will be 0 or null. There won't be anything there. You cannot create objects by creating an array. The array will only be able to hold the objects. It doesn't actually create the objects. You have to do that in a separate line of code. But for primitives, you're not creating anything new. You're just giving it a value. So it's able to kind of have a default value here in the beginning. If you want to assign values, this is how you can do that. You can use the identifier with a bracket, and inside that bracket this time, this is indicating the index that I'm trying to use. So here, int 5, this is indicating that the size of this array will be 5. Here, nums 0 is indicating what value I want to be in the 0 index. The 0 location will have a 4. The 1 location will have a 3. The 2 location will have a 7, etc. And you can see here that these variables are able to be put in as parameters and arguments to methods, it's also able to calculate them as though they were just normal values. So num2 minus nums1 will output 4 because it evaluates as 7 minus 3, and 7 minus 3 gives me 4. Also notice here that this nums.length. This is an important distinction between the length method of a string and the array property length. So nums.length is a property of the nums array. Word.length parentheses is a method of the string object. So just keep those in mind. If you're trying to find the length of an array, you do not use the parentheses at the end. So here's a second way to create an array, and that's with an initializer list, sometimes called an array literal. And so I just say integer array high scores, and I set that equal to curly brace, and then I put in my values separated by commas and close it with a semicolon. And now I've created an array of size 5 that is not starting with 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. It's starting with the values that I put in here. And as you can see here, string array names is not initializing as null. It's initializing as actual values: Jamal, Elamine, Emily, Destiny, Mateo, Sophia. So this is a nice way, if you need that to not be null right away, you can put some strings in there using this initializer list. So that's kind of the two different ways to actually create arrays with values in them. And here, this just kind of gives you some more information and shows you what's actually happening as we use those initializer lists. So here, this is just kind of a summary of everything we talked about so far. And so just kind of look through here. This is the basics of an array. The last thing I want to do here before we go is I want to show you in the Schoolology, there is an arrays.txt file that's in there. If you copy and paste that, you can put that into a Java file. And that arrays.txt will create an arrays.java class with a number of methods that are already created for you that you can use. All right. And some of these are going to be important for you to use in our averages lab that you should be working on. But one thing I want to kind of show you here is a couple different things about how to use these static methods. So the arrays class, you can copy and paste that in, create a new file, arrays.java. What I want you to do is create an average.java file, which is going to have its own main method. And inside the main method, I want you to create an array of integers. So int array, we'll say integers is equal to, and we're going to call this show method, or sorry, not the show method, the getInfo method. All right, so my array integers, so let's do new int bracket, and so I want 10, all right? I want 10 integers, so I'm going to create the integer array integers of size 10, and then I want this to be filled with 10 numbers that the user is going to be able to input. So I want to use this getInfo. A couple different ways you can do this. If you want, you can take this whole method, copy it, and paste it here. Notice that that is separate from the main method. The main method starts and ends the get info starts and ends, and then those are both inside the class. All right. So if I copy this get info method into the average class, then right up here, I can just call it get info, and then I have to give it an integer array, which I created here integers. So get info integers, close it, and semicolon. And now that's going to call this method asking the user to provide them with an integer. All right. So if I want to then show what integers were produced, then I can do this, use this show method. Now, again, you can copy and paste this, or this is the other way you can do it. If you don't want to put all these methods into your averages, you can access them by saying arrays dot show and then send integers there. So here's the two different ways, right? Arrays dot show, because this method is in the arrays class, so I can tell it to look in the arrays file and notice that arrays and average are in the same folder. Otherwise, this is not going to work. All right. So they're in the same folder. So I can tell it, look in this class, get the show method, and then run it. I didn't have to do that here because the get info was copied and pasted into this file here. So get info already exists in average. So I don't have to say where to look. I don't have to say average dot get info because it's in average. But I want to use the arrays show. So I say arrays dot show, and then that will work for me. The other thing here, notice that I am throwing the IO exception here in the main method. That is because my get info method is throwing an IO exception. If this method throws an IO exception and it's called inside the main method must also throw an IO exception, or it gets an IO exception error. All right, so here we go, enter an integer. So I'm just going to enter some numbers. And then you can see here that it ran that 10 times. It then was able to show the array, all the values that are in the array, and tell me the size of the array. All right, and I'll let you kind of explore the code of this to figure out how it's doing that, what it's doing, how you might be able to use that. And you are going to need to create a new method called findAverage, which takes all those values, adds them up, finds the average of the number, and returns that back to the main method. And then also let the user know what the average was. All right, so that's the averages lab. If you have any questions, let me know. Take care.